Let's see what you can do. Brian and I have talked many times on many panels about all the stuff that he spins up. And so we're going to talk about his new book, although I don't want to use this as an opportunity for selling your book, if you want to be honest with you. Okay. And I want to talk about sort of what your concepts are in the book, and then jump off from there, because I think that's a much more interesting way to talk about it. He's got a new book called What's the Future? WTF, if you understand the inside joke there. I have a new book coming out called What the Fuck? I assume that's what you're doing there, right?
That's pretty much it, yes.
Okay, good. So let's talk about what the main concepts are, and then I'll cut you off rudely when I'm bored.
Looking forward to it.
Okay.
Well, first, let me say that it's not a commercial for the book because Group High, at Group High on Twitter, sent them a shout out, bought one for each and every one of you. So let's thank them and ready to go.
All right, so not a really good strategy for selling books, but all right. So let's talk about the main concepts of the book. You have this idea of ultimate moment, first moment. I think that you're building the concept around it. Why don't you explain that, and then I'll pick it apart.
Okay. All right, ready, go. All right, so Google 2 years ago introduced the zero moment of truth. It was this idea that when there's awareness or a stimulus, that the customer is essentially going to Google it. And what comes back in the zero moment of truth is what a lot of businesses and marketers spend money on to make sure that their websites, their landing pages shows up at the top. But my argument is...
Why is it the zero moment?
Because P&G owns the first moment of truth.
Oh, okay, all right, okay, all right.
So they went backwards.
It sounds like patient zero, and you're going to get a terrible virus that die of, but go ahead.
It does.
So zero moment is when you search and find.
Yeah, search and find. So my argument was, in a world where people aren't Googling on smartphones and tablets, what comes back in the zero moment of truth? And the idea is shared experiences, tweets, YouTube videos, things that just a search engine isn't going to pick up naturally, and that it's not native to the mobile device.
Okay. Well, let's start. So the first one is just the old search and discovery that was largely on a desktop experience,
right.
Or laptop experience. The second one is the first moment of truth,
which is when you're ready to buy something. Packaging, marketing, it sort of steers you to make the transaction. The second moment of truth is the experience when you buy it, and the ultimate moment of truth is the experience you share. You publish, you write a blog post, you tweet about it, create a video, create content, whatever it is. But the ultimate moment of truth is the next person's zero moment of truth.
So the concept is you're trying to get businesses to focus on creating experiences around their products. Can you explain what that means? Because it's sort of a fuzzy word. What does that mean, experience? Because everything can't be an experience. When you buy mayonnaise, it's certainly not an experience. Although it's
unless you can't get the jar.
Although this is San Francisco, so it could be the case. But in general, no, it's like certain things don't. What do you mean experience? Because every single product is not an experience.
Well, I mean, Oreos aren't an experience either, right? Unless you're dunking in the dark, which is what everybody is celebrating them for. But I think the idea is through content and through storytelling, or through packaging, or just creative ways to engage somebody, that they're going to share those experiences or those moments. And those are the things that sort of they land in this cloud, and they don't disappear. They're not Snapchats, And over time, these shared experiences are the brand.
And that every business now in the future has to sell. They haven't not done that in the past. I mean, I think you think of great iconic products like Kodak with its wonderful commercials, or Bologna, or that's sort of the history behind a lot of advertising, is that it makes you have an emotional storytelling reaction to it, is that it's a narrative of some kind, and that you have an emotional attachment to a product. How is that different? Is you just getting your customers to just talk about these moments?
Well, these moments are important because they're happening in places that aren't associated with traditional media, right? So television, print, web search, etc. These are things that are not taking place in a connected consumer's world, right? Because those are just all old forms of media. In this world, you and I control the medium. And we decide what we find, we decide what we create, what we contribute. So the idea is, if you can create experiences, and I'm not talking about user-generated content, I'm talking about create experiences that are shareable. So it requires architecture, it requires definition, so that everything that people are Instagramming or posting are by design, so that you're essentially branding when somebody says something about you.
So give me some examples, because there's two sides of it. One is what consumers say about you, which can be bad or good, and then what businesses are trying. Instagram's a very good example. Burberry's is the famous example on Instagram that they've been putting up pictures, they've been creating experience. Vine and Instagram videos are trying to do that in some level. They just marketed the Steve Jobs movie that way by using short vines. So how do you, let's start first about from the business point of view. What does that mean, creating some clever Instagram video or Vine video or picture? How do you, what it comes out to do? Because a lot of this is very small, and these people have big budgets to do big, and they want big impact.
Yeah, well, there's two. There's the push, right, which is what marketers have done really well. Create some content and push it out on every channel possible, whether it's earned, paid, or owned. And then there's the pull. I think what we have to learn in a connected society is that if you create a clever Vine trailer, right, you have to assume that you're going to push it out and that people are going to share it. But how do you pull people to it? It's not about who you reach, it's about who you don't reach. And that's where you start to get the numbers. For example, when you experiment with pull, you're essentially creating traffic. And it's not just views for the sake of views, it's views that mean something. So how this is different is that everybody in this room at some point of their career, or maybe they still do, has written a press release. I think honestly it's just a waste of time, right? You could take that same time and create whatever that Vine video is, whatever that infographic is going to be, and use a more effective form of storytelling and invest that extra money and time in audience development, in creating pull, and creating demand, so that you're not just telling a story through a medium, that you become the storyteller and you by default shape the brand.
But that requires, as I asked Andy before, a level of creativity that doesn't always scale.
Right.
I mean, that's a kind of saying that most of the stuff isn't any good. And just like there's some great, beautifully written press releases, there are some, most of them are not in general, they're fine. But it just creates a level of creativity that is difficult to do on that side. And that to me is one prevention for people doing it. The other is just, it's just a lot easier to just put out a press release or tweet something or do your typical 10 things that you have to do when you put out a product of some kind.
Well, one of my favorite examples is, well, there's two. One is Mint.com, and if you don't know a gentleman by the name of Noah Kagan, he is sort of often aligned with the word growth hacking. And the idea was, if you're trying to teach millennials about financial management, how do you do it? Well, you have to make it cool, you have to make it easy to understand, you have to make it incredibly visual. And they came up with a series of graphics, videos, stories that just spoke right to their millennial consumer. They were brilliant, and naturally they were shared because they were brilliant. But more importantly, Noah spent a lot of time and budget experimenting with how do you pull audiences to it. So you publish it, how do you drive people to it? And this push-pull experiment that he did, it helped make Mint what it was, and ultimately acquired by it.
What did he do that was effective?
Oh, I mean, he became part of every community where millennials spend their time, and from Reddit to Hacker News to just communities across the board, to some of the lifestyle boards, and he would become part of it. And if he wasn't part of it, he would find somebody who was part of it, and essentially create not this idea of brand ambassadors, but real people who were connected to share something that was cool, and it better be cool, otherwise it was going to expand. And so his marketing strategy, the content was just one part of it. His ultimate plan was to drive traffic to Mint, to use it. And when you have to live your life by conversions, not just traffic, but conversions, it's a real different form of content. So it's not just creative, it's not just shareable, but it creates a sense of urgency in the person who sees it and shares it to do something with it. And I thought that was a brilliant art form that's not scalable, but it does say that we need some new expertise in the game in order to play like that, if that's the new standard.
And what was the other example?
The new one is Ford's Fusion commercials that they're doing. They call them Random Acts of Fusion. And I always believe that, look, a lot of companies today are on Twitter and Facebook simply because they have to be. They're reacting, customers are complaining, they're listening, but they're either engaging or running sentiment reports, but not necessarily steering the conversation. And in the Random Acts of Fusion, it's sort of this psychology of positive reinforcement or positive conditioning. If you want more people to say good things, then reinforce it and reward them for it. Otherwise, you'll always be reacting to the negative things. And so they were finding people who were singing praise of the Fusion. They were finding people who were making interesting comments about the Fusion and sparking them to keep going and keep going. And eventually it would make the conversation so much louder, so much more pervasive that if you ran a word cloud around the car brand, you would see it's all positive, it's all loving, kind of like what Zappos or Virgin America gets naturally. And then they created content around those experiences and around those engagements that were so clever, so fun that you couldn't help but watch and share them.
Yeah, that, again, it describes the situation. It's almost, it reminds me of like organic farming. You know, you have to pull the wheat, everything is rather slow, and in this world, these companies, especially people in Oreos or whatever, they need a much bigger impact. How do you do that in a world where this is very hand to mouth? This is like churning butter as far as I can see. You know what I mean? Like creating these individual experiences, making them all special. How does that evolve in a world where people will try something and then iterate it to exhaustion?
Oh, well, look, I mean, one could say that the way that the traditional marketing communications is rolling today is exhausting too, and its ROI is very little in comparison to what other people are showing is possible. I mean, in the Mint.com example, or Ford, or Burberry, I mean, what we're talking about, or even Oreo, in these shared experience models, we're talking about millions of people that are reached with very little investment. So yes, it's a bit more organic, but it's also, imagine if you were organically farming and producing greater volumes of produce that were just delicious. So it's a different model that I think is scalable. It's just requiring sort of a different approach or a different philosophy. You don't disregard all of the traditional things, because there are still people who watch television and who use Google, but every day there's this...
There are still people who use Google.
But you know, look, there's a reason that YouTube is the second largest search engine, right? It's because how many people in the room have gone to YouTube to watch a video about how to use a product rather than read the instruction manual? Right. So I did this for Vitamix because I had to make a decision about that or another blender, and I didn't go to Google at all. I went to YouTube to watch videos.
Which is owned by Google, but okay.
Well, yeah, but the point is that they get that.
They have you coming and fucking going, just so you know.
I was just there yesterday too, and I had to catch myself on this.
You're not escaping them.
No, I know. In fact, wait, I'm getting buzzed right now. That's probably them.
They'll be putting chips in everybody's head soon.
The whole YouTube phenomenon, though, and Google's brilliant for this, is that people want to watch a video because it's easier, it works on their mobile devices, and the point that Vitamix had missed is that in every one of those ultimate moments of truth, they were shared experiences from people who had figured something out. And they published a video that people found and loved and shared and commented on, and I couldn't find one video from any of the manufacturers that I was researching. And neither of those manufacturers probably even knew about this phenomenon, that these were the experiences that people were having, that people were sharing.
This is you're buying a mixer.
Yes.
Well, they've got one company did that rather effectively. The one
Will It Blend.
Will It Blend, right?
Exactly. Blend Tech.
Right. Exactly.
They didn't make my Final Cut though.
Yeah.
The soups were so much
You were
better
interested
than
in
Vitamix.
blending an iPhone?
No, I did. Yeah, it was soups or an iPhone.
Yeah,
I went with
was
soups.
interesting. I was like, why would I put fruit in that thing that blends an iPhone? But it still was amusing. So what doesn't work in this area? What is dangerous when you start to get into these areas?
Yeah, all right, so there's so much that's dangerous, and it's actually, it's us. We're working against ourselves in this. We're really used to, we write for people that we're not trying to reach. Like in the Mint.com example, they use art, they use colors, they use words, they use fonts that were specific to the millennial audience. What we most often get in the trap of is creating content that is written for the person who's going to approve it or sign the check, not for the people that we're trying to reach. That's the biggest trap. Then once we do create that content, we push it out in the channels that we think are going to reach people, but they don't. I think the biggest opportunity here is to just take a step back. I'll give you an example. There's this philosophy that says, if you want to get a car from 30 to 50 miles per gallon, it takes innovation, right? You try something new, you keep experimenting. If you want to get a car from 30 miles per gallon to 100 miles per gallon, then it takes something completely different. It takes starting over. And to me, this is the content opportunity, the marketing opportunity, the storytelling opportunities. You have native advertising, you have own media that you can create and share in social now. This whole thing about storytelling, I think we get confused with the word creative. The idea of storytelling is understanding the pains or the experiences of other people and understanding how they consume and share content. There's a science and an art to it, and then creating these campaigns, these forms of content in ways that honestly connect with somebody, and then also finding creative ways to pull people to it. Because assuming that you publish something and it reaches everybody is a mistake. You know, you can send the same tweet 19 times in the same day, and you'll only have something like it's a tiny percentage, a single-digit overlap.
So, because they get read rather quickly and then consumed.
Yeah.
Consumed quickly, I guess. I think apparently 60% of tweets get read in the first hour.
Yeah, I think it's even less than that now.
Yeah. So, Leslie, and then let's get to some questions, because I think you guys put some great questions for you. What is, when you talk about doing this, you're trying to, and what Andy was talking about is going around sort of traditional press organizations, which is fine by us. But how do you think that plays a role in it, or is you trying to get to the press, or more just do this one off to the consumers, the way politicians have been trying to reach voters more directly? It's a whole more of direct reaching these people to tell your story. Is there any use for media in that, traditional media, the free media?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, media is critical. Every form of influence has to be factored into how we communicate with anybody, how any business tries to reach any audience, honestly. But there's just no one way to do it. There's a level of authority that comes when you write something. Your audience stops to listen, so they pay attention. But at the same time, it's not, you don't reach everybody. And I love Noah's examples because he was always trying to solve a business problem and then use marketing as a way to find a solution for that. That's the whole point of growth hacking, is try to solve a business problem creatively. When you do it that way, you actually find out that how you would approach it is differently. So yes, I would have to still work with you. I would have to work with me, with traditional agencies. I would still have to find new forms of folks that do things differently. But look, the easy answer is this. What are you trying to do? How are you going to measure success? Because it can't be by views, it can't be by likes or comments. That's just activity. But if you're trying to solve for something like drive more traffic to equate to leads, to equate to conversions, to get brand resonance up, whatever that metric is, that ultimate metric is that they use for advertising or big numbers or big media, then apply it here and see how you would scale to that.
Questions from the audience? Questions? Thank you.
Hello. I actually wanted to ask a question about scaling down, because I'm sure a lot of us here are with startups or working with startups, and Reddit and BuzzFeed and $100,000 spends, that's a 6-month budget for me. So is it really worthwhile to try to reach, I don't even know what Reddit's up to, 20 million monthly users, if not more. If they're all in that 15 to 25-year-old age bracket, we're all, not all, but maybe some of us are lucky not to be in business-to-business technology, but a lot of us in this room are. Isn't it a better spend of our time with limited resources to look at these smaller niche communities and work on building our relationships there?
Yeah, absolutely. To some, Reddit is the target demographic. Others, there are equal communities that might not have such rabid numbers, but that do reach the people you're trying to influence. Look, some of the best work in this regard has been done in the 90s and the early 2000s, back when things like discussion boards and forums were the only form of social media. Try publishing a press release in one of those communities. It's just not going to work. But listening, understanding, answering questions, seeing what questions people ask over and over and over again, that should absolutely inspire your content. I'll give you a quick example. There's a company that they're in the semiconductor business. They make the semiconductors. It's terribly unsexy. But they use what they call keyword anthropology. Instead of looking at the key terms or the key words that people use, they studied the questions that people were asking over and over and over again. It turned out to be like 4 or 5 questions. And they would create relentlessly content that used that question in the headline and then ended it with something like answered, revealed, whatever it was. And they didn't sell in their blog posts. They just answered the question honestly, like a human being to another human being. And naturally, those started to index, those started to perform better in search. And those blog posts alone increased the lead generation by 600% in 6 months, only because it was doing something that was already happening already, answering people's questions.
Brian, Andy from BuzzFeed. I hope you can talk a little bit more about the point you made previously about how new media should look at what traditional advertising has done and set up the same benchmarks. And I don't know if it's the challenge, but the question I have is, I think traditional media does a great job to build awareness at the top of the funnel, and the Google is amazing at the bottom of the funnel. And it seems like new media really plays in the middle of the funnel, where it's like consideration and preference and trial and sharing and engagement. And so, in a sense, you're encouraging new media to like establish benchmarks against old media, but to me they're solving two different problems. So I was just wondering if you can comment on that.
First, Andy, big fan, and the funnel metaphor is dead in new media. It's actually a continuous journey. And what's important in this, and what Andy's really asking, is that he's exactly right. At the center of this ellipse, and you can Google up the dynamic customer journey so you can see what it looks like. At the center of this ellipse is what we call the influence loop. So every aspect of consideration, to purchase, to loyalty, to unhappiness or discontent, is all part of this journey, and it's continuous, right? Even after you make a purchase, this is true for automobiles, beauty products, fashion. Even after you make a purchase, you're still going back through the loop to validate your decision. And you're also going back into the loop to share what your experiences are. You're grabbing selfies of yourself in a new dress, for example. And you're sharing that experience over and over and over again. And why the center is the influence loop is because that's what comes back in every moment of truth. So in BuzzFeed's case, right, this is one of the reasons why I'm a big fan, is that when we talk about this new form of content creation, there's an incredible amount of pull, right? So I got to imagine the science behind the headlines and the content that's created on BuzzFeed is pretty dynamic. So what they're doing, and what this is the most important part, and this comes to a question you asked earlier, what BuzzFeed has figured out is what people are talking about in all of these communities and all of these forums that's really, really hot. And they plug into the culture of the digital society and are able to communicate back to them in a way that's legitimate. That's from the community for the community. We come at it from a marketing perspective, what we want to say versus what they want to hear or what they want to say. And when you can reverse engineer it in that way, you'll actually find that the headlines are amazing. The way that you lead into content is amazing. The sub-captions, by the way, look at how BuzzFeed captions every image. There's so much science behind those words. It's so clever.
They also chained hipster 20-year-olds from Brooklyn to their desks, right, Andy? Correct? Ironic hipsters. I can't wait to see The Office. I feel like something like that. Arianna Huffington used to keep a bunch of them upstairs.
I have one in my pocket.
You remember? She had an upstairs thing, and you open a shelf of books. There was like a secret thing, and it was packed with 20-year-olds who were being hip and ironic and trapped there until Arianna let them out. It does require. You do have a staff of younger people that sit around and think up those things.
But at the same time, though, look at a traditional. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to tweet a headline from a traditional online publication, and it's 240 characters long, and I have to go back and edit the headline so that I can try to share it. And I think that when you're creating content for a shareable economy, it requires a different mindset. That's one of the reasons that I think BuzzFeed has hit it on the head. But more importantly, if you think about content then that's going to be shared at every step of the journey, it's not just about creating awareness, it's about reinforcing experiences, it's about defining experiences. So your content opportunity, your marketing opportunity is now at every stage of the journey, hence the 4 moments of truth.
So maybe you can talk a little about the trend lines a little bit. With traditional media going through so much transformation themselves, do you see it continuing to shrink and more direct, social media taking a stronger role, or how do you see traditional media morphing and in the direction they're headed?
You mean traditional media advertising?
Traditional media, like publications and all those types of things.
Oh my goodness, maybe this one's better for you.
All right,
No fucking
love you
idea.
guys.
Somehow we'll survive.
I think that, looking at all things D, I mean, you guys are ahead of the conversation all the time. I mean, so that you bring in good J school productivity with resilience, meaning that they're always looking for the story, but they're entrenched as sort of the authority in Silicon Valley in all forms of technology, and then you've mastered every medium, right? So when you send something on Facebook, you tweet, or you publish something, people listen, so you've adapted. And I think that's the point. I think the key word, Charlene Lee and I use this word a lot at Altimeter Group, and it sounds totally like a buzzword, but resilience is actually a brilliant word for any form of media.
I just noticed that word. What the hell does that mean?
It means sort of persistent and adaptable, open to transforming in light of the outside ecosystem.
Although I would argue we break news. We really, it's correct, incredibly. I know it's a big shocker, but it really is not really much. It's not terrifically more complicated than that, but we certainly use fun headlines. We do follows of analysis that doesn't just create commodity journalism. We try to minimize things like funding, these things that are just press releases rewritten, we make them shorter, or we try to find some angle or art or something like that, or make it more interesting or give some insight. So everything we do has to, it doesn't happen every time, but I have a new rule that we don't write funding stories unless we can add something to it in some way, unless we break a story that's really interesting. But that's a perfect example. Funding stories are perfect. They really mean nothing.
But for a small team, though, you also have mastered all forms of media, right? So conferences, YouTube videos, I mean, everything. And it's always culturally relevant. And the other point that I wanted to make about what Card as well and what everybody needs to consider is the culture of the community that you're publishing on and who you're trying to reach and for, right? So what a lot of marketers get caught up in is writing one story for one audience, when in fact that story could be repurposed 10, 20 times for different subsets of folks, right? Because today what we're learning about in new media is it's not about demographics, it's about psychographics, right? The whole concept of Google circles is brilliant because what you're learning is that people are creating networks around interests, not just relationships. And as you can start to create content for, what would be the Google circles that you could take one piece of content for, and how would you change that story for each one of those circles? So I'll give you an example. I just published a new Conversation Prism, which is a landscape of all of the social networks out there, organized by how they're used. That story's been told, hey, here's an infographic of social media, it could just be one general audience, but that story's been told for business audiences, for vertical professions, at least 20 times, and every time it starts to expand, almost like a concentric circle, the reach, because you're going to people based on what's interesting to them, not one overarching piece.
I wish I could say we thought about this as deeply as you think we do, but I don't think we're remarkable. I think that most old media is unremarkable, and that they don't want to have a conversation with readers. I think we consider every story we do a narrative, a long narrative, a Yahoo story. It's like a telenovela over there. Now we have a new star. But seriously, it's a good one. Jazz hands. Look over here. Up hands for everybody. So we look at all stories as narratives, and I think that's just different. Instead of just a transactional situation, as we look at it as an ongoing story about mobile or social media or Twitter. They're not just they all fit together. I think that's one of the differences. And we do respond to readers, which I think most old media haven't done.
You do. One of the things that you heard in that, especially around the telenovela example, is that she doesn't just provide narrative. There's also personality. Every one of your staff has personality, and it's rich in the narrative. And think about the content that you create, right? Everybody uses Oreo as an example because you can tell the personality of the brand in all of the content that they're creating, and it's bringing it alive. And that's part of the thing that's so important in a new media landscape. Think about what you share on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. It's always something emotional. You love something, you hate something, you're doing something. And in these regards, by putting personality in these things, you can make a personal connection. It makes it more likely.
Except it has to be personality based in reporting. I think some people just pontificate and pundit, like they're just blowhards really, they don't know what they're talking about. And I think when we put in an aside, which we do all the time, it's based in reporting. Like yesterday, when in Yahoo, David Dibble stepped down and he's staying on as an advisor and getting a giant sum of money. And everybody just reported it as that. And I said, oh please, this is a big optical thing because they don't want another big executive leaving, so it looks like he's staying, but actually he's living across the country and honestly never coming to work. So we knew that, and it was all optical. And we made that point based on reporting of knowing that this was not, he's there, not really, but it's a nice way of putting it. And so we reported the news and at the same time explained it. But we based it in reporting and not just what we imagined, because I think a lot of blogs now just guess at shit. And so I don't really feel like that's a really, so nobody at AllThingsD can make an observation without it being based in And once they do, they absolutely can do that. And instead of doing, I was just an aside, I was talking to a very prominent writer, and his editor, who's a newish editor, he's a very well-known personality-driven writer, asked him if he could get an analyst to say the observations he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
And of course he said, fuck no. But his whole appeal, I was sort of shocked that the editor asked that, because his whole appeal is he does the reporting and then he makes an observation that's usually a good one. Sometimes it's crazy, sometimes it's good, but it's always based on his experience, and he doesn't need an analyst, or they used to do that at the Journal all the time, get an analyst to say what you already know from reporting. And I think that that's where we cross the line, where we say it, the stuff that we know, but we know it. And I think that's a big difference.
You become the authority. It was just one of the reasons why I noticed we're not getting any calls from you guys anymore at Altimeter Group. You don't need us anymore.
Because we don't need analysts.
So I want to come back to the title of the book for a second, Brian. So there's a lot of people in this room, I know colleagues of ours and friends, who essentially feel like Sisyphus at this point. We've been pushing the boulder uphill and it continues to roll downhill because we're trying to create the future, trying to make people understand the funnel's dead, the dynamic customer journey's here. And in fact, there's a new glass ceiling, I think it's a gorilla glass ceiling, of all of these change agents trying to create this future and make it happen. But I've been talking to a lot of CEOs and other senior executives lately, and they don't understand even the impact of the connected society because of their silo mentality of distribution of labor. They have people underneath them. I've got my marketing guy, he takes care of that. They don't understand the shift on strategy.
Right.
So what can we do to encourage more leaders to open up, take note? And what can we do to break through sort of the care barrier that's preventing them from seeing the importance?
I think you have to wait till they die.
I've been waiting 25 years myself.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, there's certain people like Aaron Levy at Fox. There's people who understand it and get it. I just think it's just they're never going to be interested in it, and you can't, literally, it's past due date on these people. And honestly, I just don't. They're not all of a sudden going to go, yes, Twitter, of course. They just, except for Rupert Murdoch, who seems to be enjoying himself.
But Brian, you go around the world talking to these guys. Who are the ones who get it at the senior level, the old white guys who actually are opening up? What is it that's opening it up for them?
Checkbook. No, look. What you'll notice is that on the cover of the book, the grayed out WTF is actually there for a reason. The entire book was named What's the Future of Business, so that I could actually put WTF on a book cover, because it's how I feel. It is how I feel when I go into meetings with executives. I'm going to be at a national grocery store later this afternoon meeting with their CEO about the same thing. And what I've learned in years about how do you get top-down transformation, because you're not going to break through the glass ceiling. Top-down transformation has to happen from the top because people understand that it's helpful to their business. So by going in and talking about Twitter and what our Pinterest strategy is going to be, you're never going to win. They don't care. They don't even think about that. This is the world they live in. They report to shareholders and stakeholders, they read matrices, and they actually love PowerPoints. The thing about that, though, is when you can make a business case for this, technology becomes an enabler, right? So if you understand that right now this is how much profitability you're using, but you know this percentage of your market is increasingly going away from the traditional web and traditional media in order to make decisions, there's numbers you can actually assign to that in order to make a business case. And if we make this investment, this is what we're going to get out of it. Then the rest is technology, marketing, creative, and what have you. So I've learned, this is one of the reasons why several years ago I became an analyst, was so that I can get a business audience and speak to them through numbers and through essentially not even talking like an analyst, talking more like a lawyer, making the legal case, presenting evidence, and then empowering those around me, going back to the other silos to work with them, bring everybody together. So there's a video that you should watch. It's called How do you change businesses and bring them into new media? And the answer is to stop talking about social media and start using social media as an enabler for your bigger mission or your bigger purpose. But look, I got 1 minute. I've been given the sign. I want to just share one last bit with you, and then Cara can close this up. Is when you get the book, this is the point I want you guys to make with it. It's my 5th book, and I could have approached it like just another book, me pontificating and sharing with you my life's lessons. Instead, I took the BuzzFeed approach and changed how I talk, the sentences that I use. Instead of writing a 400-page business book, it's rich with graphics and imagery and storytelling and shorter bursts of text, so that way you can get through it. And I ended up studying for about a year user experience design. So the book is actually a reinvented platform for me to you as a mobile app. It's an analog app. It looks and feels and breathes like the way that you navigate through your devices. And if I have to do that to change the way that you read a book, to get you even to read a book, then imagine what you can do for everything that you create and everything that you publish today. Everything is open to reinvention and innovation. And you'll find that it just takes the same sort of value that you want to teach or the story that you want to tell. It just takes a different way to string it all together, because there's no way that you would read another one of my 400-page books, and there's no way that I could even write one again, to be honest, because my brain is rewired just like all of our brains are rewired.
Really good on that point. And by the way, that pocket square is fantastic.
It's an award for you.
Yeah, no, you wear it all the time. You're a dandy. Anyway, not a great word, dandy.
Yeah, it's dandy.
Yeah, you can call it. There's another word, popinjay, but you're not that. Look it up. Anyway, thank you very much. Brian's great, and I'm sure he can answer questions. And it looks like a great book. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.